All right, hey guys, welcome to the last week of class. So in the last week, we're going to cover chapters 13 and 14. Those chapters cover monetary policy and fiscal policy. So it's a perfect ending point. Those really describe the main tools that the government has at its disposal to stabilize the economy, to help bring us out of recessions and slow us down if we're overheating and getting into inflationary periods. So chapter 13 does monetary policy, but first I want to kind of set the stage here and just talk a little bit about the two of them together. So monetary policy is defined on the left there. It refers specifically to the tools that the government has to control the size of the nation's money supply. So we learned a couple of chapters ago about the money supply. Basically that means it's the amount of readily spendable money that's out there in the economy, and you've read about how that plays a role in affecting the rate of inflation. So that's monetary policy. It's all about controlling the money supply. The three tools that the Federal Reserve has to do that, the government, are the buying and selling of bonds. That's called open market operations because they are actually buying and selling bonds in an open market. They're buying and selling them from people like you and me and companies and other governments and things. Changing the reserve requirement. You hopefully remember the reserve requirement is that portion of a bank's total deposits that it has to keep on hand. It can't loan out. So the Fed can change that. And changing the discount rate or the interest rates. Realistically, the Fed only controls one specific interest rate. It's the rate on overnight loans that they make to banks. But when they change that rate, most interest rates tend to follow. So interest rates kind of all move together. So realistically, they have a big effect on the interest rates. So anyway, those three tools are what the Federal Reserve uses to operate monetary policy. Fiscal policy is a different set of tools. Fiscal refers to the budget. So it's managing the government budget with an eye toward either speeding up or slowing down the economy. So the tools there are making changes to the tax rates. That can be both personal and business taxes, and changes to government purchases and transfer payments. So together, that's government spending. So that's two separate sets of tools. So the first thing, just terminology-wise, when you hear monetary policy, be sure you're thinking about buying bonds, selling bonds, changing the reserve requirement, and interest rates. Fiscal policy refers to taxes and government spending. So a little more on the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the branch of government that operates monetary policy. First of all, there's a lot of, I guess I forgot, it was a couple chapters ago you read all the structure of the Fed. That's good. Importantly, just a couple of highlights about the Fed here. The important thing I think first is that the Fed is independent. And personally, I think that's a really good thing. It's not political. The people who work there and operate the Fed are not elected. They're not voted on. We don't know what political party they're affiliated with or anything like that. So I think that's a good thing. That means they don't have to sort of do favors for people to give them money and that kind of thing. So I think that's important, and I think that's good. The book talks quite a bit about the goals of the Federal Reserve, and it makes it clear that they were never really clearly defined. We had a law back in 1913, I think, that created the Federal Reserve, but never really defined what its job was. But realistically, its main focus, its most important goal in recent years has been trying to control inflation. So that should make sense because, as you should know by now, monetary policy, controlling the size of the money supply, has a serious plays a serious role in the rate of inflation. So having the group that controls the money supply look at inflation as its main target makes sense. But also at times, if we get into a recession or if we're in a period of serious inflation, the Fed will operate monetary policy to try to close those gaps and get us closer to kind of a stable place where we should be. So that's a little bit about what the Fed actually does. Now, I think a couple slides ago mentioned that the open market operations, buying and selling of bonds, is the most common tool that the Fed uses to control the money supply. So maybe just a little basic primer on bonds here is in order, because some of you may not understand really what bonds are. I don't know a lot about them, but the simple version is bonds are essentially loans made to whoever issues the bond. So in this chapter, we're talking about government bonds. The government federal government, state governments, municipal governments can issue bonds, and those are essentially just loans where they are borrowing money from people like us. So you can see on the slide here, the government is the borrower. They lend $50,000, or they take out a $50,000 loan from you. They agree to pay you $50,000 back at the date of maturity. So these bonds all mature on a certain date, so the government has to pay you back. And in the meantime, they're going to pay you 6% interest. So it's really just like a loan. It's just that we're loaning money to the government. Another key point is that there are old bonds and there are new bonds. So the government is issuing new bonds, but you can also buy existing bonds from people and other investors. So old bonds and new bonds sort of compete with each other. So if new bonds, for example, are being issued at 6%, like the example here, and I happen to be holding on to a bond that's only paying 3%, obviously nobody's going to want to buy my 3% bond. But the way I can sell it is by lowering the price. So the prices of old bonds move in opposite directions from the interest rate. As interest rates rise, prices of old bonds fall. So that's a little bit about how bonds work. Anyway, I guess the key point is to understanding bonds, and this chapter, a bond is not something you can spend. So it's not part of the money supply. So when the government wants to speed up the economy and increase the money supply, they buy bonds back from people. So they're putting money in your hands. That's money that you can spend. If they want to slow down the economy, they issue bonds and sell them. Then they're taking money out of your hands and giving you a bond, which you can't spend. So that shrinks the money supply. So that's the key idea there. All right, so I'd said before that the Fed can sometimes help to close a recessionary gap. Here is a graph or set of graphs right out of the book explaining how that's done. So in panel A, if the government wants to, say we're in a recession, so we're down at AD1, aggregate demand has fallen and price levels fallen, real GDP is low. If they want to speed it back up, they might do something like buy bonds, which puts money in people's hands. That will shift aggregate demand up because people are going to go out and spend some of that money. Panel B shows you the demand for bonds increasing because the Fed is buying them, so the demand for bonds increases, the price increases. In panel C, it shows you how putting that money in people's hands increases the money supply, so the supply of money will shift to the right. So panel C is showing you the supply and demand for money. So as the supply shifts out to the right, the price of money falls. The price of money is the interest rate. So this pushes down the interest rate. And panel D shows you that it also changes the exchange rates. It does that because, how does it do that? It puts all these dollars out there and decreases interest rates. Got to think about that. All right, anyway, I'm almost out of time, so I will stop the video there and come back and make one more part. All right, thank you.